That's the beauty of this. You can't mess it up. You really can't. So, you know, you don't have to. They all turn out. They all turn out. And sometimes, when I'm doing this part here, I sometimes pull the, I sometimes pull that thumb down so that I can get right next to the edge of the mitten, because otherwise it's up into the thumb part. Okay, and why that happens, that this is longer, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. I think, well, I don't pull on it, you know, I don't know. So here's the back and the front inside of the mitten.
So you stretch them to sort of end up being kind of
The same length?
Back.
Not really.
No. All right.
And I flip it around. And work with it. I put my push in my liner. Now this is the part where I said don't worry about the bottom. Look at as I pull how that stretches. And I can pull on this to stretch it. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to have a lot of give inside of that mitten. And so I just kind of pull it and I kind of do this, that, and whatever. And I take it off, and I kind of hold it like that, okay? And there is no really right or wrong. I just go and snip that right off. See, never was uneven. Good way to, okay, then I do my next one. So you're actually making, you're sewing mittens twice to get one pair. The liner and the sweater part. Now you're probably wondering why I add that extra onto the bottom of the mitten. If I don't, the mittens just seem to be too short in the length. And I'd rather have a longer mitten that kind of covers your wrist a little bit than a shorter mitten. Now I suppose if you wanted to, you could do some trimming along here to make it, closer to the seam, but I generally don't. Liner in. Okay, here comes my precise way of doing this. And I wish I could tell you how I don't. I just get the feel of it, And now there's going to be a cuff on here too, so you don't have to think about, well, that's going to be too short, because the cuff will come down a little ways too. And I look at it and get it feeling right, and I take it off. and just cut off that bottom. And then we're ready for the cuffs. And I used to, this video, if you watch it, the Studio 5 video, they talk about sewing the cuff just to this fleece and then turning it up over the mitten and just tacking it with a button. And that doesn't work for me because it's too loose yet. I mean, sometimes you have to tack on the sides, but I wanted it all sewn together. So here is the sleeve. These are the ends of the sleeve of this sweater. And what I do, and that's why all my cuffs are different. You know, there's a stretch here in a play, and you don't know how that's all going to end up. You know, you can kind of feel the stretch. I have a small wrist, and I know that, so I have to be kind of careful of that. But I turn it around so that the seam is showing, and I just put it on my wrist. And I'm going, oh, that's going to be too big. And especially if you look at it here, it's a little bit fuller at the top. So I don't want so much fullness up there. So I just kind of put it on my wrist and go, I think I have to sew in about that much. And then I take it and I just put it down there and I sew in. And you know, I used to worry about some of the cuffs were so tight. Oh my gosh, people won't be able to get them on. And I always told people, you just need to try them on because every pair is different. Every pair is different. And you know what? Some of the tightest cuffs, there were some that I couldn't even get on. Oh, make sure this is a tight. That's okay. My daughter will buy it. She'll wear it. I said, are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, I don't know. So people. So I kind of feel, and it's like, okay, yeah, I think that feels, you know, and there's some stretch here yet. So then I just take and cut that off. Leave about a 1/4 inch seam. Oh, I should have measured that one before I did it. Sometimes I don't do that. So I put it on and get the feel. And I think it's really important to reinforce into that cuff because that's turned over, so you don't want that seam to split apart. So back stitch on that. Okay. I should have tried that before I cut it off. Yep, it works. So now we turn them around. And this is where I do my most ripping. I'm not thinking sometimes, and you stick the cuff in the finished side down inside the liner, and I try to match up one of the seams with one of the seams on the mitten. Which seam? I don't pay any attention. Either the right hand side or the left hand side. And so I push it down in there. So the raw edge is at the end. So again, I have the finished side, not turned inside out. This is tricky too. The finished side goes down into the liner with the finished end inside the mitten. So this is the raw edge, this is the finished edge, and you put the finished edge inside the liner. Okay. And then I change my stitch to a zigzag stitch. And I don't know why, I just do. Just maybe it looks a little bit nicer, but nobody sees it anyway. And I just take like a 1/4 inch. And probably my least favorite thing to do is putting on the cuffs. I don't know. It's bulky. And I've had to rip them out too many times. And it's like I don't want to. And here's where, you know, the main part of the mitten might seem a little bit wider than the cuff, so you just kind of work your sweater or your cuff into the fabric. And I've never really had any major puckering. I guess if I ever have, I've, you know, ripped it out. But and I don't go around this twice, but I make sure I overlap when I'm finished up. And so now you have, and I look inside to make sure that, oops, I didn't quite catch everything there. I'm going to go. And sometimes what I will do is I will trim this off. Now for some reason this sweater is kind of ravelly, and it really shouldn't be because it was, I think it was 100% wool. And when they felt up they shouldn't ravel, but you know, you just don't know. Okay, so I pull it out and now I have the seam showing here because I have it inside. And I simply put it on and flip it over, and you've got your cuff. Okay, and then you take and buttons. If you have buttons, or start looking for old buttons. You know, you exhaust those. I ended up buying at Walmart. That's about the cheapest place. You can have any size you want, and you know, you can have lots of buttons. What?
I have lots of buttons.
Do you? But do you have two that match?
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, there you go.
And so, you know, if anyone needs buttons or threads, I've cleaned out 2 houses now. My mother's
Oh,
and my
okay.
so I have buttons, I have threads.
Awesome.
They saved everything.
Awesome. And that's, you know, I had lots of buttons because when my parents passed away, they'd save buttons, and so I had these big tins of Courier knife buttons, and I started going through them though, but all of a sudden I found out, there's got to be at least 2, and I have these beautiful buttons, but I couldn't find pairs. So anyway, then you start picking out buttons, and one day I was at Goodwill, and oh my, there was like 6 jars of buttons in the bin. I guess you have to be there at the right time. It was the middle of the day. And I walked over there, and my eyes got that big, and there's a lady in front of me, and I'm like, okay, she's grabbing, I'm grabbing. Well, I don't want to be a pig. So I'm standing there waiting for her to take her buttons, and they had a red jar, a blue jar, and a black jar, and I don't know. Well, anyway, she took a couple jars, and I reached in there and took the red jar, and I took the blue jar and brought them home, and I'm going, God. You know, it looked like there should have been all those pairs in there, but it ended up, I have tons of blue buttons, and maybe enough for 20 pairs of mittens, you know, and the jar was that big. So, you know. So anyway, you can, you know, kind of play around with it. There's, I guess the blue is what I picked out, but you can do all kinds of things. You want to put a little pizzazz. That's kind of cute too. Size doesn't really matter. I don't know. Are those that I have finished there? You know, whatever. And my mother-in-law was visiting me last October, and I said, you know, she's 81. She wants to keep busy, and I said, you know, would you do me a favor? Would you do a chain stitch with yarn? And so she stitched, I don't know, about 40 different I don't knit or crochet, knit, I guess. And so she did that in blacks and grays, variegated. And so sometimes I tie a little piece of yarn on the end and fasten it, and then have knots on the end of it. And so, you know, that's another thing that you could do in place of buttons. But so you sew this button on, and then I also take and I sew and tack it on either side, and I do like 5 stitches and then under and under to reinforce it on either side. And I don't do this side at all, so it's actually tacked in 3 places, on the back and then on either side. And that is how you make a pair of mittens. The end.